And I, for one, am really pleased about that because I think art is one of those outlets that can tell us more than it reveals in itself, just because of the access to the collective that I think is really important. So I'm looking forward to this a great deal, and I'm glad you all are here.
Okay, so we are on YouTube at the moment, and let me just see what's going on here. I don't know why. Oh, wait a minute.
Now, Kiley, where are you located?
Tim, I'm in Davis, California, about 15 minutes from Sacramento.
Oh, sure. We used to live real near Davis in Dixon.
Yeah, Dixon's like 10 minutes up the road. Right. Nice place.
Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is Skip Conover, and Tim Holmes and I are the founders of the Wisdom Path Colloquia. And this evening, we're going to have as our featured guest, Dr. Kiley Laughlin from Northern California. And the reason we're having him especially is because I moved him up in the queue because he had a very interesting set of images in volume 4 of Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arzt, volume 4. And Kiley's idea is to reproduce, well, I'll have him explain it, but to do the Red Book as a graphic novel. And so I want to hear from him about that. And I think that's a very exciting idea. So let me just read this short introduction of Kiley, and then we will proceed. So Kiley Laughlin is a PhD, earned his doctorate at Pacifica Graduate Institute, and is an independent scholar. He currently co-chairs the International Association for Jungian Studies. Kiley is also a 27-year veteran of the U.S. Army and has served in multiple assignments during his lengthy military career, to include deployments in Iraq and the Balkans. As a U.S. Army officer, Kiley enjoys finding practical ways of applying Jungian concepts to the military decision-making process. Kiley's research interests include the Red Book, typology, and the role of individuation in 21st century geopolitics. Major publications include Phoenix Rising, a comparative study of the Phoenix symbol as a goal of the alchemical work and the individuation process. 2014, The Spectrum of Consciousness, Color Symbolism in Typology of C.G. Jung, 2015, and Treasure Hunting, a hermeneutical inquiry into the final painting of Liber Novus, 2017. He lives in Northern California, and his webpage is kqlaughlin.com. And I will put that in the description of the video that will go with this. And so, Kiley, welcome, and it's your shout.
Okay, well, Skip, first off, thank you for the invitation, and everybody that's on, so many people. It's nice to see you all in different parts of the country and the world. I don't have a script. I don't have anything like that, so I'm just going to go ad hoc and take this extemporaneously and focus on what Skip was saying, the paper that I wrote earlier this year called The Red Book, a Graphic Novelty. Now, I tend to talk fast, so I'm going to consciously and deliberately slow down my pace of speech. That way you can all understand what I'm saying. And then towards the end, as I get through my lecture, I'll be more than happy to take any questions from anybody in the group, from Skip or otherwise. So, Skip provided a good plug-in for me and who I am and where I'm coming from. But I think most of us that are really into Jung and really understand Jung and have studied Jung, it's important for me to take a brief moment to articulate and explain how I came to Jung and why I'm so interested in Jung, because we all have a biography, and each one is just as important, but that I think will provide some good background information and context in terms of who I am and where I'm coming from and where my ideas are going. So I actually grew up in Marysville, California, which is about an hour north of Sacramento, and Davis is about an hour from there. And I joined the Army when I was 17 years old, and mostly the reason I joined the Army was because, I was very patriotic, and I didn't really have many other opportunities. I grew up very poor, and the Army, like for a lot of young people, the military is the best way to get out of your socioeconomic circumstances. So when I was 17, I went through the delayed entry program, and about a month after graduating high school in 1993, I left for basic training. I went to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, and then after that, I came back to California, and I went to the Defense Language Institute in Monterey, California, and I got paid to learn Spanish for 6 months, which was a great experience. Subsequent to the language school, I went to Fort Huachuca, Arizona, and as a very young person, I was only 18 at the time. I got to learn how to be an interrogator of all things, right? So I became an interrogator, and then I was stationed. This was when I was active duty. I was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I think there's somebody here from North Carolina. Um, yeah, that's right. So Jerome's from North Carolina. So I lived in North Carolina for 3 years in Fayetteville, and then towards the end of that assignment, all I wanted to do is go back to California and go back to school. So I used the GI Bill Army College Fund to go back to California. I went to Chico State, California State University in Chico, and I lived there for about 3 or 4 years. And then I graduated with a degree in social science, and I eventually got a teaching credential. And then meanwhile, simultaneous to that, I stayed in the Army, but I was in the reserves, actually the National Guard, the California National Guard, which is Compo 2, is Component 2. Component 1 is the Army, the active duty Army, and Component 3 is reserves. So I stayed in Compo 2 in the National Guard, and after I graduated from college, I went to Officer Candidate School in Camp San Luis Obispo down in Central California, and I commissioned in 2002 as an intelligence officer, which made sense because I was an intelligence, NCO or professional prior to that. So I became an intelligence officer in 2002. And then after that, not too long after that, I went back to Fort Huachuca, and I went to OBC, which is Officer Basic Course, and became an MI officer. And then right after that, I went to the Balkans. I went to Bosnia for about eight to 9 months, and I was in Bosnia and Tuzla, and I was there on a tactical human intelligence team for about 8 months or so. Then I came back, and then I got sucked up into another here in California with the California National Guard, and I deployed to Iraq. And I was in Iraq for about a year, and I was there as a operational management team chief in Diwania, Iraq. And then I was single at the time, so I came back after that deployment, and I realized that, contractors in Iraq were making pretty good money. And I was still a certified interrogator, and there was a demand to become an interrogator in Iraq. So I went back to Iraq, and as a contractor for 2 more years doing interrogation work, which is kind of controversial, but there's control measures with interrogation, as Skip knows. This is after Abu Ghraib, by the way. So I was there for 2 more years. In 2008, I came back from Iraq. I went back to Fort Huachuca. I went to counterintelligence school. And then right after counterintelligence school, I deployed with 40th Infantry Division, which is in Los Alamitos, California, to go to Kosovo. So I went to Kosovo, and I came back from Kosovo. I was doing, counterintelligence work in Kosovo, and I came back in Kosovo in late 2009, and then I came up to Davis, where I currently live, because I was living in Marysville at the time, and I landed a job at U.C. Davis teaching military science. I did that for a few years, and then I had a bug. I wanted to go back to school, so I applied for Pacifica Graduate Institute. I went back and spent the better part of 5 or 6 years getting my PhD in depth psychology. And then not long after that, I got deployed back to Kosovo. So I'm back to Kosovo in 2016. And by this time, I'm married with a few kids. Life is good. I got back from Kosovo, and then I got selected to become a battalion commander in San Francisco, California for the 223rd Military Intelligence Battalion. I did that for 2.5 years. And then after that, I became the Assistant Chief of Staff for Intelligence at 40th ID, 40th Infantry Division. And for my full-time job, I'm the Director of Intelligence at the headquarters here in Sacramento for the California Army National Guard. So that's pretty much my entire experience. And, you know, the whole Jungian thing, believe it or not, I've always had an interest in Carl Jung, at least going back to the mid 90s. And I didn't know much about Carl Jung then, but I thought he was cool. And I thought his theories and the collective unconscious and archetypes, it resonated with me. And then when I was in Iraq the second time, I had about 3 or 4 really big dreams. I mean, really big dreams. And they just blew my mind away. And I said, there's something about Carl Jung and his theories that are not only true, but they help me personally better navigate my own individuation journey. And for those that understand Jung, I think they can relate to him as well. So that prompted me to eventually go back to school and get my PhD. So ever since 2011, I've been really invested not only in the military, but in the Jungian community. And that led to a series of different associations and contacts with different people, whether it's Murray Stein or folks of the International Association for Jungian Studies, Sonu Shamdasani, Andreas Jung, Thomas Fisher, just amazing people in the Jungian community that have had the honor and the opportunity to know and meet and help, you know, steer my way and mentor me with respect to Jungian psychology. So I had, as Skip mentioned, you know, there's this book right here, and it's volume 4 of Jung's Red Book for Our Time. And, you know, I think he has it too, so Jerome has it. But just by a show of hands, if I may ask the audience, how many of you have had a chance to actually read the Red Book? Not so much this book, but read the Red Book from back to back, or from front to back, excuse me. Okay, so most people have read the Red Book. And if you haven't read the Red Book, you know what it is. And the Red Book, for those that have read it, most of you have read it, it's very profound and very deep. And you're not going to get it the first time you read it. It's like reading scripture. It's very profound. And I finally got to read the Red Book. In fact, I just got you can't see it here, but I finally got the Black Books too. And I'm working through those as well, but they're just as profound and just as deep. So it's going to take me a while to get through those. So after reading the Red Book, what I realized is that the Red Book could be construed, here's my thesis, it could be construed as a pre-modern graphic novel. A pre-modern graphic novel. And that's why I titled the paper in the book a pre-modern graphic novelty. And in order to really expand upon that thesis, I had to ask myself, well, what is a graphic novel? And what is a comic book? And what is the purpose of a graphic novel? And what is the purpose of a comic book? And really, they're stories, essentially, but they're in graphical format. And for those of you who read the Red Book, you'll go through it and you see there's a rhyme or reason, there's a purpose behind the images and the pictures in the Red Book. And I realized that because of the graphic weight, because the way it was rendered by Carl Jung, that for those of us that have an interest in popular culture and contemporary culture, comic books and superheroes and Star Wars and things like that, there's definitely a place for those type of things in Jungian psychology. For example, one of the things I did when I was in the late 80s and early 90s, I read a lot of graphic novels, The Dark Knight Returns, Batman, The Watchmen, the Sandman, it goes on. And what a really good graphic novel does, it touches something within ourselves that talks to our unconscious, and it resonates with those archetypal and configurations within the human psyche. A good graphic novel. And the same thing applies to the Red Book. So that was the idea. So I reached out to Murray Stein and the late Thomas Arzt, and I asked them about that, and they welcomed me to submit a paper. And the product of that is the Red Book, a pre-modern graphic novelty, which I'm going to get into in just a minute. So when you read the Red Book, it's interesting because what Jung did essentially through that self-experiment of his is not only is he the participator, or not only is he a participant within the narrative of the Red Book, he's also an observer. So he's doing two things. He's observing these things taking place to him between November of 1913 and on to about 1916. He's experiencing these things, but he's also an active participant in the narrative. And I haven't, beyond just a few people, I haven't really seen many scholars touch on this point in terms of how Jung renders himself in the Red Book or Liber Novus and how he does that. And I'm going to explain, and I'm going to share the screen and show you some images from the Red Book on the computer here shortly. But essentially, there's a figure in the Red Book called the youthful supporter, or youthful aid. And I'm going to just take a moment here. I'm going to go ahead and try to share this, share screen. Let me pull this up. And let me digress for a minute. I'm just going to show you some pictures I did here. So let me see here how I do this. All panelists, okay. Okay, can you see my screen? Skip, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so here's the paper right here. I'm going to get the book here in a minute, but I'm just going to show you this. So I didn't do this. Somebody was mentioning art earlier, and it's a great vesicle for for unconscious work. But I didn't write this. I actually went through a contractor on Fiverr, and she wrote, and the comic book artist on Fiverr wrote these for me. So going back to my own timeline, what I did here is I had her, after I envisioned it and told her what to write out, I had her depict myself in my own history going back to 2007 to when I first went to Pacifica to one of the seminars or introductory sessions they had there for future students. And
Kiley, we're not seeing your screen.
you can't see it? Okay, 1 second here. Let me try to fix it.
At the bottom of your screen, if you push your cursor down, you'll see a green thing lit up. If you hit that button, it'll give you the choice of all the things on your screen. And then you highlight that thing, and then you hit share screen. Yep, you got it.
There it is. Okay, so now you can see it. So anyways, this is the paper right here. This is the Red Book of Graphic Novelty. And this was published again on May 8th of 2020. And what is interesting about it, and I think what drew some people to this particular paper was the fact that, just like Jung, I was mentioning earlier, I put myself in the narrative. I put myself in the narrative of coming to terms with the idea of the Red Book as a graphic novel by putting myself into the paper. So what I do here is in August 2007, I traveled to Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, California, where I attend an introduction of the school's academic programs. And there's the Barrett Center. And then Dr. Stephen Eisenstadt gives a short, cordial overview of depth psychology. And then I politely introduce myself to him. And I tell him that I recently read about Jung's Red Book. And by the way, this is obviously long before it was published, or at least a few years before it was published. And he says, there are plans to publish it. And my imagination started to turn because that was pretty cool. And then flash forward, I told you earlier about the first Kosovo deployment when I came back in November 2009. So there's Laughlin, that was Captain Laughlin, returning from Kosovo to assume my civilian life after a long deployment in the Balkans. And I'm happy to be home. And a treasure awaits me. And there's my Amazon package with my Red Book, with all my mail. And I open it, and it's a beautiful book, obviously, Awestruck, and the Red Book. And there's probably not the best picture of me. I had more hair then. That was over 10 years ago. And then coming down here, and then I didn't mention this in the introduction, but in April 2015, I flew from Sacramento to Tel Aviv to attend the Jung-Neumann Letters Conference. And Neumann obviously was Erich Neumann, one of Jung's students who lived in Tel Aviv for a number of years in exile. So there's a great conference out there. And I went out there, and most of the Jung family was there, just great people. There's Ulrich Kearney, not the best picture of him in comic book format, but Ulrich Kearney is one of the grandsons of Carl Jung. And Andreas Jung is another grandson that lives in Jung's house. It was recently converted into a museum. And then Thomas Fisher, who's the great-grandson, he's a little bit older than me, but he's tall, obviously. He's just a great guy. So I met the Jung family, the core of the Jung family there at in Tel Aviv. Well, it was in Shefetz Kibbutz, I think it was called. But I went to this conference, and there they were. And this is where the idea came from, right? So, and Thomas is just kind of a practical guy. He manages the foundation of Carl Jung. He's transitioning from that position right now, but that was his position for a number of years. And I asked him a question, say, hey man, I mean, this is pretty cool stuff, the Red Book, you know, and this is about 6 years after it was published. And I say to him, I say, you know, have you ever thought about adapting the Red Book into a graphic novel? And of course, he kind of dismisses it a little bit and says, we're not going to do anything like that, you know, still his comic books, stuff like that. So, but it got me thinking about this idea in 2015 that eventually led to a paper in 2020 about actually converting or adapting the Red Book into a graphic novel, because it's a medium that is so popular, especially with young people. And I think it would be really cool to get more young people engaged in Carl Jung's work, and I think that's an appropriate medium to do that. So that's where the idea came from, and that led to this paper. And I'm not going to read the paper, but I'm going to go over the main points of it. So that was that experience, and that's really the genesis of this paper, where it came from. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing this. So now I can see you again. And I'm going to go ahead and shift over to the Red Book, so bear with me. And we're going to talk about the Red Book. And if I'm going too fast, please tell me to slow down. Okay. Let me find the Red Book. My computer.
So Kylie, you did all the artwork for that?
I did not do the artwork. I inspired the artwork in comic book format, but I used a contractor off Fiverr.com. You can go there and use graphic artists. It's pretty cheap. It's a lot cheaper than using one here. It's fairly inexpensive, and that was result of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very nice. Well done.
Thank you. So let's go over. If you have, I really don't mind. I know it's a Q&A at the end, but just if you have any other questions, please feel free to chime in. I don't mind one way or the other. Okay, so stand by. I'm just going to go ahead and grab this, and I'm going to go to the Red Book. Okay, let me just figure out how to share this again. So I'm going to, there it is. Okay, I found it. Okay, can you see that?
Yeah. Yes.
On the screen, do you see the Red Book?
Yes.
Okay, you see that, it says the Red Book.
Right.
Okay, so let's start with the Red Book here. And this, okay, so let's stop right there for a second. Let me pull this over. 1 second, let me just shrink this. Okay, so there's, Liber Primus. So there's the first page of Liber Primus. And I'm not going to spend too much time on the initial images, but I want to just say a few things. And for those of you who really understand the Red Book, have read it a few times, you probably already get this, so bear with me. So that's a majuscule, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I talk about that in the paper. It's a majuscule, and a majuscule is a big letter that was rendered in an illuminated manuscript in the Middle Ages, in the medieval times. And Jung did that for a reason, but this picture is arguably one of the most important in the Red Book. And I'll tell you why, because it sets the tone, it sets the stage for everything to follow. I don't read German. I don't speak German. I'd love to learn German someday, but this right here says, I'm gonna mispronounce it, but it says Der Weg des Kommenden, which in English means the way of what is to come, the way of things to come, the way of what is to come. So just this word, this majuscule, and the way that Jung brings this up, what you notice about this picture is the fact that there's 4 worlds, there's 4 domains in the picture. There's the ocean or the sea, there's the land, there's the sky, and then way up here with the stars and the moon and the astrological symbols, you find the heavens. So you have the beyond. You have you have the heavens and you have space, essentially. So Jung is saying, okay, here's the whole world. This is really a grand theory in terms of the Red Book, because he's introducing the Red Book by showing a glimpse of the whole world, all four aspects of the world, which obviously have, they also have typological significance too, if you understand the classical elements, but that's another story. So that picture is important. This is Liber Primus. And I just want to say again, Liber Primus was actually, it's book one of the Liber Novus, the Red Book, but it's not part of the physical Red Book because it was written on, I think, 7 or 8 parchment sheets. That's why you see, the kind of tattered edges here on this page. So this is Liber Primus, which isn't part, again, of the actual physical Red Book that Jung commissioned around, 1914. Okay, so let's continue. Now here's the majuscules again. This is where the graphical aspect of the Red Book comes out with respect to my correlation to a graphic novel. And you see this majuscule, another majuscule D, and there's a dove in there. And the dove is important because it really is a symbolic rendition or some symbolic expression of Jung's soul. And in 1912, Jung had a dream of a white dove that transformed into a little girl that he talks about in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. And this is obviously written before that. And then, of course, you see the white dove here again, and then you see the black snake, which is going to make another appearance in the Red Book later. And then we have more majuscules here. So let me just kind of go through this real quick. And now, okay, so this, I'm going to stop here for a minute, and I'm going to take a few moments to talk about this majuscule D with the snakes and this figure here. Okay, this figure, and this is Laughlin's theory. I never actually talked to Sonu Shamdasani about this or any of my other folks I know, the Jungian scholars I know in the community. But this image right here is the youthful supporter. That's the youthful supporter. And what's important about this character, it really is Jung. That's Jung. So when you see that picture or you see that image, that person with his haircut, you're going to see him throughout it. That really is Jung. And it's not self-evident. You really have to do some research and some scholarly study to connect the dots in the Red Book and the footnotes to make that correlation. And in the Black Books, I haven't read it all yet, but there's the same correlation that this figure here is a avatar of Carl Jung in the narrative itself. So keep that in mind. And by the way, the snakes are important. They're all around Jung there in that image. And then we have a castle here that is kind of foreshadows Jung eventually creating Bollingen. I see that picture of Bollingen behind Skip there. And we keep on going down. You have some images, and then of course we get in some more images. This is the fallen youth that Jung, Siegfried essentially. He has a vision of Siegfried in the water in the cave with the scarab beetle and the orb of the sun coming up out of the waters. And you keep on going down. And this is a very interesting picture here too, because again, you see the same figure with kind of like the Prince Valiant haircut with the white robe, and that's the youthful supporter as well. And it's Jung as well. They're both the same figure, the same character in the narrative of the Red Book. And we keep on going down here, and there's a garden image, and then this, just as a tangential comment, the star, the 8-pronged star, is very important. In fact, the 8-pronged star, it comes up many times in the Red Book, and it really is a symbol of Jung's star. It's like the Star of Bethlehem, but it's the new God. It's a rendition or a symbolic expression of the new God that Jung eventually called Faunus, or Phanes, or Faunus. And that's interesting too, because it's a little miniature of Jung. When you see it, this little like pudgy fat, of Jung's avatar in the Red Book. So moving on here. Okay, I'm going to slow down. And here's another image right here to the left-hand side of the majuscule. And what you see here, and Jung talks about this memories, dreams, reflections, is they're on the mountainside, and Siegfried comes down, and Jung and a youthful supporter, which they're one and the same, they're gonna merge together here shortly, is that they ambush Siegfried, and they shoot him, and they kill him. And there's symbolic significance behind that too, in light of the coming of World War I. This is going to come, within about 9 or 10 months of all of this happening to him in his fantasies. Okay, so that's that. So I went through that. Now we're still in Liber Primus, and you see Jung goes down, he descends into the cave, and again you see the same figure here. This is either the youthful supporter or Carl Jung, and he's encountering, in this image, he's encountering Salome and Elijah. And there they are with the white temple in the background. That's going to crop up again in the work. And let me keep on going here. Okay, so that's Liber Primus, and then we get into Liber Secundus. And I'm just going to keep on scrolling down. I'm going to slow down a little bit here. And this is the beginning of Liber Secundus. And again, you see the magical D with essentially the eye of the self or the eye of God. And you see these snake symbols in the background. And then Die Bilder des Ehren Den, which essentially translates to the images of the Erin, which is the title of Liber Secundus, book 2 of Liber Primus or Liber Novus. And these images are going to keep on coming on. So again, there's, on the castle top in the magical D, you see an image of the youthful supporter or Carl Jung. So as I go through this, there's a graphical novel component to this that's written, that's inspired by the Middle Ages of the tradition of creating illuminated manuscripts. But at the same time, you see this narrative, and you really have to read the text and look at the pictures, and then understand what Jung was going through and what he was trying to accomplish through his effort of putting everything down in the black books and eventually transcribing the information and editing it into the red book later. So there's Carl Jung again, or the youthful supporter, as I've called him. And I'm going to talk about the youthful supporter here again. And here's the castle. That castle is actually described in the narrative of the red book when Jung goes there and he encounters an old man and his daughter, but that's another story. And just a lot of narrative here, a lot of text, and another majuscule. Just bear with me here. I want to get down to the good stuff here. Okay, so, that's not that important. Okay, so this is that's actually the worm, and Jung talks about that same image is eventually later rendered in Systema Mundi Totius, System of All Worlds is his first mandala, but that to this this lecture, so bear with me. And okay, this is interesting because you see what essentially comes down like a church stained glass window with Kabiri. There's Kabiri in there, and Kabiri is another part of Jung's personal myth. But let me keep on going. I want to get down. There's Isdubar. I won't talk about him right now. And let's keep on going. I'm almost there. Okay, so that's part of Isdubar. Okay, so again, the youthful supporter, you see the same haircut. And that's another rendition of Jung. So if you understand that, you can see where the narrative's going in conjunction with the text when you read it. And that's the transformation to the God in the egg. And there's the serpent. And there's crossing the waters with the egg, with the monsters of the unconscious beneath. And we're almost there here. Just get to the good pictures. Okay, there's the egg again, going through. And there's the egg under the Weigsdrel. And there's Carl Jung, or the youthful supporter. Okay, stay. Okay, there's the cones that Jung talks about. Almost there. Whoops. Okay, so now we're moving into this stuff's very abstract. You see you see some of the same patterns, but there's a lot of abstract art here. And there's the runes. He talks about that in the black books, but I won't go into that now. That's a lot of pictures. Okay, so here's some archetypal figures. You see Ka, you have different figures there with the star in the middle, but let me get through that and I'll explain this. Okay, and here's, as I was saying, so that's Faunus. As I was saying, he's kind of like a pudgy little depiction of of the avatar character that Jung was depicting himself of. So that's kind of interesting that he shared some of the same semblance, the same characteristics or features of the youthful supporter character. Okay, that's okay, right there. We'll stop right there for a second. This is important. Okay, so there's Atma Vikdu. These are very important characters in Jung's personal myth. Atma Vikdu, the youthful supporter, which my suggestion, my theory, my idea based on the research is that when you see that figure, that really is Carl Jung. And then you have Telesphorus or Faunus, same character, same god. And then you have this one is I think it's I can't remember the translation for the leopard, but it's the spirit of man or of evil of man. But okay, so there's Carl Jung, and he's kind of holding back the Atma Vikdu, which is more or less a kind of a Ophidian or a reptile-like figure, and now he's going after Atma Vikdu, and he's battling Atma Vikdu. So let's stop there for a minute. So this is interesting because when you read graphic novels and you read stories and you watch a good movie or like watch comic book movies or Star Wars, there's a certain dramatic element to it, a psychodrama. There's tension and there's things taking, there's conflict, and you see this in Carl Jung. And Carl Jung is actually the person in the guise of an avatar, which is the youthful supporter, that is actually battling, or in this case, slaying the dragon. And out of that dragon, what you do, you see the blood, but you also see the little orbs that come out of it. And that's another telltale sign that's part of Jung's personal myth that will make more sense later. So just think about this as a comic book or a graphic novel. It's one image in a graphic novel. Not all of them are like that because some of the art's very abstract. It's hard to interpret and read. But this is pretty cut and dry.
Orbs.
So, and then the diamond comes out, but that, by the way, that's Atma Vikdu again, because Atma Vikdu actually came out of Philemon. They're interrelated, but that's another story. Okay, so there it is. So this is really important. So you take note of the previous picture I focused on with respect to the youthful supporter slaying the dragon, which was Atma Vikdu, which is manifestation of Philemon, the libido formation, right? And now Jung is taking water, and he is watering the carcass of Atma Vikdu, and out of the carcass is growing these plants, and they're budding, and they're coming up, and on each plant you see something very important. You see the creative impulse that manifesting and coming to life, and that creative impulse that Jung's feeding through the water or cultivating is the Kabiri, which show up quite a bit in the Red Book, the Kabiri. And that's another important part. Of course, as I mentioned earlier, you see the same white temple, which is a religious symbol in the backdrop. That's Philemon's temple, by the way. So the narrative's there. My argument is this is Carl Jung, and then of course this is where it starts. This is where it climaxes, right? So essentially you see the Kabiri coming out, and then this is a symbol of the self. In probably the simplest terms, this is a symbol of the self. You see the quaternity here. You see the fire. The Gnostic element is alive and well within that image. And just like that first picture, you don't really see the heavens, obviously, but you see life and just regular life taking place in the background of this amazing psychological archetypal experience that Jung is rendering himself in, of manifesting and unleashing the forces of the universe in what I interpret as a image or a symbol of the self. And of course, down here, and I can relate to this because I'm a soldier, and Skip was a Marine. You see these little soldiers doing their thing, target practice, and getting ready for war. And of course, this was on the eve of World War I, so that makes sense as well. So you see the conflict, and you see the foreshadowing of things to come as well. Okay, so and then we keep on going again. The same figure, the Mithraic symbol with the bowl, and then this is interesting here. This is very interesting because you see my interpretation of this symbol, and I think it's right, is the fact that you see the Gnostic symbol, but you see Jung himself in the form of the avatar, of the youthful supporter. He's suffering. He's being pulled apart by the opposites, just like Christ on the cross, or just like the sacrifice of the bull in the Mithraic religion, or the Gnostic aspect of the the will of life, essentially. You see all these things coming together. And another argument for this picture right here is there's a typological aspect to this, because Jung was starting to get into typology, and he was studying typology around the same time, at least a few years afterwards. And this, I think, this picture was actually created about in 1919 or 1920. So you see that part too. So you see all these things taking place, but the missing piece is, where does Jung figure into this, graphically speaking? If you look at it like a graphic novel, and it really is that image right there with the youthful supporter, which is Jung. Now, I think that's pretty much most of the depictions of Jung, and we get into more abstract stuff here. And most of you have read the Red Book, so I'm not going to talk too much more about that. But let me just go back here. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to focus again on the youthful supporter on this figure right here. And as you see, again, he's unleashing these powers of the universe. This is a symbol of the self. Now, this is very important, because I'm going to show you another picture that a lot of people haven't seen. Some people have seen it. I actually saw the real picture in 2019. I went to U.C. Santa Barbara, and they had a Jungian conference down there prior to COVID, and it was amazing. Sonu Shamdasani was there, and they had the black books there on display in the art museum there in U.C. Santa Barbara, and they also had some of the standalone active imaginations or pictures that Jung created throughout his life. Now, that's an important point also, because keep in mind that Jung had several, probably at least a dozen, of standalone images of artwork that was never included into the Red Book, but it was still part of Red Book canon. It was still part of the narrative, but it never got in there. So that's an important part. But I'm going to show you something. But before I do that, I want to just go back to the Red Book as a graphic novel and tell you how this works. So this figure right here, the youthful supporter, there's a reason that Jung rendered himself this way. Jung, if you go back to and you read Memories, Dreams, Reflections, and read some of the Jung history, is that Jung identified his father, who died very young. He was only in his I think he was about 54. He died in 1895, and he identified his father as Amfortas, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. And Amfortas was a Grail king and one of the variations of the Grail legend. And what was interesting about Amfortas is that he had a wound. I think he was actually pierced by the spear, and it would never heal. And his libido was just draining away. And then lo and behold, in the story of Parsifal, who is another part, a very key figure within the Grail legend, Parsifal, this youthful supporter, he comes into the narrative, and there's different variations in terms of how the story goes, but essentially he is a person through the anima, at least the Jung's interpretations, able to vindicate or save or find salvation for Amfortas, and actually heal the Amfortas wound through the Holy Grail. And that's a climax of a climax of the story in many of the variations of the Grail legend. So if you read the Red Book, you'll recall that Parsifal, there's a scene, I think it's from Wagner, but there's a scene from Parsifal where Jung is in the insane asylum and everything transitions, and there's a psychodrama of the Parsifal legend being played like on stage, and that's where that comes from. And when you put those connections together between Jung's personal myth with respect to his identification of his father with Amfortas and his own personal identification with Parsifal, the myth and the graphical aspect, the romantic aspect of the Red Book makes more sense, because you see now where it's going, what he was trying to aim to do, and why he rendered himself as this figure. Now, there's a hidden clue here. Now I'm going to show you how that works. The picture, I have it written down here. The picture I'm about to show you is actually called We Fear and We Hope. And I don't know why that's titled that. It's actually the picture is in a private collection right now. It was on display at UC Santa Barbara when I went there in the spring of 2019. But let me pull up that picture and let me tell you something about it. Let's see here. Okay, 1 second. Got to go back here. Okay, stop sharing that. I'm going to go back and share. Okay, there it is. And share. Okay, can you see that, Skip?
Yep, can see. Yep.
Okay, there it is. Okay.
That's in Jung's the shorter version of Jung's art.
Yes. Yes, it's it was, but what's interesting about it is, I mean, a lot of people have seen this image probably already. I'm assuming that even some of the audience here.
Mhm.
But what is interesting about it is you find some of the same archetypal figures in this image that are depicted or described in Jung's personal myth and the Red Book and the Black Books. And if I were, there's no key here, legend doesn't tell me who people are, but if I were a betting person applying some reasoning, you see Philemon. I think that's Elijah, and that's probably Bacchus, and that's probably a rendition of Salome, probably, maybe not. And then there's the Reef of Life, and there's some activity taking place here. But then there's just another character right here that has a cross on his chest, and he has a spear. Magically, he has a spear. And if you look at it closely, he has kind of like armor on, but it really looks like the same character or the figure that he depicted in the Red Book in his art that I'm identifying as Parsifal, that Jung identified with. So not only is this in the Red Book, but you can find correlations and connections in other standalone arts between Parsifal and the fact, or at least the theory behind the fact that Jung chose to depict himself as an avatar of Parsifal. And that too, I talk about in the paper as a libido formation. This is where all the activities taking place within the Red Book, and that's why it's so similar, in my view, to the medium of a graphic novel. So that's that. So that's my theory behind Parsifal. And what I would also say, let me stop sharing this real quick and come back to all of you. If you go back here, okay, so that's that. So I can't see it now. Okay, so that's okay. So hopefully I don't really have much more to say. That was pretty much everything, but I'm going to wrap this up, and then we can hopefully just have a nice discussion. We'll take lots of questions because we got plenty of time. But in summation, I wrote a paper called The Red Book, a Premodern Graphic Novelty, because I saw parallels in the contemporary form of art or writing called a graphic novel with what Jung tried to do in the Red Book. And I don't think obviously Jung wasn't intentionally trying to create a graphic novel, but there's parallels there. And then I actually brought this idea to Thomas Fisher. I never pushed it about taking the Red Book and trying to convert it into an actual graphic novel, not the Red Book itself, but actually taking that genre and converting it over to that. And I think it'd be really interesting thing to do. And one of the other parallels I made is, if you go, I'm a huge Batman fan. I love Batman. There's so much archetypal depth to Batman with respect to the shadow and some of the Jungian ideas. Also in the paper, I draw a direct comparison to what Jung is trying to accomplish through the youthful supporter as a kind of an anti-hero, going through all these experiences and going into the unconscious, going to the underworld, restoring his father's own libido. And that's another story that comes back later. And then going into the shadows and coming back up. The whole Jungian myth is fascinating, because even though it sounds cliche, but you have a fairly modern character, a modern historical person in the form of Jung, that if you read the myth aright, he essentially breaks from Freud, and then he finds a way, because he's practicing yoga at this time, and he finds a way to go into the figurative underworld, which has been around in terms of literature and scripture and myth, for thousands and thousands of years. He finds a modern way, a modern method to actually descend into the unconscious or descend into the underworld and find this treasure hard to attain within the shadows, and then brings it back up and imparts this gift, imparts this knowledge in the form of a Red Book that will arguably, especially if the Black Book's being published now, it'll take decades to really get to the heart of what Jung was saying. Final point, and this is a tangential again, but I think it's an amazing story. There is a book that was published just about a year ago. I think it was 2019. It's called, I'm going to mispronounce the term, but it's called Catalfolke by Peter, I can't remember his last name right now. Kingsley. Thank you, yeah. Skip. So Peter Kingsley published this book, and it was actually a pretty good book. It was very interesting. There's a lot of new information that came out of it. But there was an interesting part that I never drew the connection on that Kingsley does. And what he essentially suggests is that there's a dream that Jung has. I believe it's in the 1930s, and I don't have it here in front of me, but I believe he talks about it in Memories, Dreams, Reflections as well. And in the dream, and I'm going to just summarize it very briefly, is the fact that he's with his followers, the Jungians, and they go to the Grail Castle, or they're going to the Grail Castle, likely in England, right? And Jung sees it, and he sees it as beyond this, like, it's parted by water, so you can't really just walk up to it. You have to swim over across the channel. There's a channel separating himself, his followers, and this Grail Castle. And incidentally, his followers fall asleep, and he wakes up and he sees a little Kabiri, a gnome essentially running around. And then by himself, he swims across the channel, and he goes to the Grail Kingdom, the Grail Castle, excuse me, to actually retrieve the Holy Grail. Which, if you understand that dream correctly, it figures back into some of these things I'm talking about with respect to the narrative and the characterology within the Red Book. And the final piece about that dream is what the argument of Kingsley is that there's a parallel. There's a parallel between that dream and Scripture, going back to the New Testament with respect to the story of Christ, where Christ is in the garden. I'm going to probably mispronounce this word too. The Garden of Gethsemane, I think it is.
Gethsemane, yeah.
Thank you. He's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and his followers, his apostles, fall asleep, and he's subsequently arrested by the Romans, and then eventually that leads to everything else that we know as Western people with respect to the story. But anyways, Kingsley draws a comparison between that story in the New Testament and the story of Jung's dream, and makes the argument that Jung, well, he doesn't really argue for it. He draws a connection, saying there's a prophetic aspect to who Jung was. That, if he was born 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago, he wouldn't be a psychologist. He would have actually been a prophet by definition. So, okay, so that pretty much, I went through that in pretty good time, and hopefully I didn't talk too fast.
That's
and
wonderful.
But I'm sure there's a lot of questions. This is the funnest part, because I love asking questions, or I love answering questions, or trying to answer questions, and just having a good discussion, because I can probably learn as much from you as you can learn from me. So Skip, as a moderator, that pretty much concludes my overview of my paper, the Red Book, a Pre-Graphic Novelty, and at your discretion, we can move on from there.
Okay, I'm going to put you back on gallery view so we can see everyone, or I can see everyone anyway.
Okay.
And that was terrific, Kylie. That really laid it out there. And I think that this talk of yours right now, as soon as we hang up on this and it gets on playback on YouTube, this amounts to your hat over the wall. You know that story, right? Where President Kennedy said that when his grandfather was a boy in Ireland, they would run through the fields, and when they got to a wall they couldn't get over, they would throw their cap over it, and then they had to get over it, or their mother would kill them when they got home.
I like that.
And so what you're doing here is throwing your cap over the wall, because there's no stopping this now, actually, is what I guess. And the reason I think that is because I've invited BTS fans to this, and I don't think any of them made it onto the Zoom, but we've had quite a number of them. We've had about 45 people on YouTube over the last hour, and the word will get out. and whether the family wants to or not, there will be a graphic novel about you. There might be a BTS album about the Red Book, who knows? But in any case, thank you very much. Let's go to questions. I'll shut up. I have a couple myself, but I'll save to the end. So go ahead, Jerome.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. The stream that you followed down through there with those pictures, I'd never seen that before. And I'd never heard of the youthful supporter mentioned. What exactly do you think that the youthful supporter represents in terms of Jung? Is it kind of like his two personalities, or like personality one and two, or?
So, so I think that's part of it. I think it's part of it. I think when he goes into the unconscious and he has that experience, his most dangerous experiment, he called it. I think he is identifying with his personality number two, and he's also looking at the historical aspect of it about who he is, and he deliberately and consciously chooses, it seems, to depict himself, his avatar in the Red Book, as a youthful supporter, which has the likeness, the historical likeness, it seems like at least, as a Parsifal figure, because he
Yeah.
identifies as a Parsifal figure. So I think there, to your question, I think there is some identification with the so-called personality number two, because that really was what the Red Book was all about, and that experience was really coming to terms and going to the unconscious and reawakening his personality number two. And keep in mind, I mean, what prefaced the Red Book experience was the fact that Jung took a stop, and this is amazing to do because I mean, a lot of us people we can't quiet our mind, much less just take a step, take a moment to go out in the backyard and look at the rocks, right? But he actually reverts back to some of his childhood um, hobbies, building little castles, little army men, like a lot of us guys did when we were kids, and that freed up energy in his unconscious and brought it to the surface because he was going back to the past and his own, you know, childhood mind or his child mind. And that I think activated certain aspects of his so-called personality number two, and that opened the gateway for him to be able to puncture and loosen the barriers of his rational mind to go into the unconscious and have that amazing experience starting in November of 1913. So yes.
Well, thank you. Yeah, that's great.
If I have a question,
Go ahead, Joss.
Kylie is great. Um, did it ever cross your mind when you were reading the Red Book? Because, to me, the Red Book is just so rich with, um, archetypes and just so much material that it could make for not just, like you said, a graphic novel, but a novel turned into a movie. I'm a movie fan, and I love what they did with Marvel comics, and they turned them into movies. But I could see this as, if you want to get to the young people, and not just the young people, but just a mass audience, if this was a movie. Just so much. Jung takes on like a shapeshifter, going from one character to the next. And I could see some, screenwriters, having so much material to come up with some creative, storyline.
So, Joss, that's a great question. And so that was one of the things. My idea is they were not stopping with a graphic novel. I think the Red Book, if you could do it the right way and have it produced the right way and have the right director behind it and have some really good creativity with special effects and stuff like that, I think it would be an amazing story. And think about it for a second. Think about, you mentioned the Avengers or Marvel movies, and obviously they're very popular. The reason these movies, in my view, are so popular, to include the Star Wars mythos, right, is because they resonate with these archetypal aspects of the human condition that Jung studied and Jung popularized within his works. And moreover, what I always find fascinating, again, this is somewhat of a tangent, but it's still applicable to what you're saying. There's a story of this guy, this film student from Modesto, California. And then there's another story of this amazing mythologist who is just super, super smart, called Joseph Campbell. And then, of course, there's Carl Jung. So what happens? So George Lucas obviously reads The Hero with a Thousand Faces in the 1960s as a student. And that prompts him, or at least it kind of inspires him, to create this space opera with Jungian archetypes called Star Wars. And the rest is history. And then, lo and behold, years later, the 1980s, George Lucas invites an aging Joseph Campbell to Skywalker Ranch near Novato, California, and they have this great discussion. And moreover, Carl Jung invited Joseph Campbell in the 1950s to Bollingen after he published A Hero with a Thousand Faces, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. So you see all of these rich connections. So I think a movie would be amazing. If anybody has any ideas how, I could ever pitch this, I'm all ears, but I think that'd be a good idea.
Absolutely. I'm with you. I love the movies. And I mean, there's like Star Wars or Avatar or any of these, classic movies. I mean, they stay with you for a lifetime. So you can imagine you have a movie that's based on Jung's Red Book. I think, man, it would be a, #1 classic, and it will last for years to come, generations to come.
Yeah. And let me add one last anecdote, and then we'll move on. But it's interesting. It was with Carl Jung. For those of you, it's just kind of interesting. But there was a story. There was a book that came out, I think, in the 1960s or so, maybe 1970s. It was by Max Zeller, and Max Zeller was a Jewish follower of Jung. And his family lives in Israel. But he wrote a book called "The Vision of a Dream, the Vision of the Night." And in that book, he talks about a encounter or a discussion he had with Carl Jung in the late 1950s. Of course, by that time period, Carl Jung was near the end of his life, and Max Zeller tells him a story. He tells him a story about a dream he had, a recent dream. He goes, Dr. Jung, I'm having this dream, a series of dreams, and in this dream, it's just really powerful, and it's a big dream. And me and these people from all over the world were assembling these pillars on this temple, and and I don't know what it means. It's just so bizarre. And people all over are building this huge temple. Can you tell me what it means? And of course, I'm paraphrasing the story. And Carl Jung, he says, yeah, that's the religion of the future. That's the temple that we're all building. We're all building this new religion, whatever that means. And he goes, and then Max Zeller says, well, okay, well, how long is that going to take to create? He goes, probably about 600 years or so, because you see what I'm saying? So I personally think I'm optimistic and maybe a little bit naive, but I think there will be a resurgence in interest in Carl Jung, not just at this level, but a higher popular level. And I think a movie or that type of medium, graphic novel, movie, whatever, I think that would be a great way to catapult more interest, especially for young people to get really excited about Jungian psychology and depth psychology as a whole.
Well, Kiley, it's coming out from BTS. Mm-hmm. And BTS is they're internationally, popular.
Yeah, I haven't. Other than what's real fast, other than Skip's told me, I haven't even had a chance to do any research on BTS or the whole Jungian connection, other than the fact that I read Jung's Map of the Soul like 20 years ago. So I'll have to take a look at that.
Yeah, I happen to have the actual dream here, so I'd like to read it. Sure. Because it's in the very first essay of the series in Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, and it's the essay by Thomas Arzt, which is truly profound. It's volume 1, and it's the very first essay, and so. Max Zeller's having this talk with Jung himself, and here's the quote. A temple of vast dimensions was in process of being built. As far as I could see ahead, behind, right, and left, there were incredible numbers of people building on gigantic pillars. I, too, was building on a pillar. The whole building was in process in its very first beginnings, but the foundation was already there, and the rest of the building was starting to go up. And I and many others were working on it. Jung said, yes, that is the temple we all build on. We don't know the people because, believe me, they build in India and China and in Russia and all over the world. That is the new religion. You know how long it will take until it is built? I said, this is Zeller. How should I know? Do you know? He said, I know. I asked him how long it will take. He said, about 600 years. Where do you know this from? I asked, and he said, from dreams, from other people's dreams, and from my own. The new religion will come together as far as we can see. And my one comment about the 600 years is that Jung knew next to nothing about computers. he died in 1961, so there were no PCs at that time, and the only computers were like UNIVACs at that time. And so, and he would have known nothing about the possibility even of the World Wide Web. And so my idea is that this is going to happen much faster. And so anyway, I'll step aside so others can ask their questions. I have a few more points I want to make here, but go ahead.
Oh,
Go ahead, Colleen.
yes, I'm wondering about the choice of the name youthful supporter. Could you say a little more about that?
Yeah. So, you know, the youthful supporter, here's my interpretation of it, and I have to go back and pick up the red book and do some more research in terms of what Jung was saying about that. So first and foremost, I think the only place that term is ever mentioned is actually in the picture when he's labeling those figures. You don't see it right now, but when he's labeling those figures, Atma Victu, Telesphoros, and the leopard, which is a different name I can't recall right now. But when he's labeling those figures, he calls the youthful supporter in German. I can't remember. No, it's actually Latin. He actually labeled it in the Latin term for the youthful supporter or youthful aid. And I think what it was is that figure was the same figure that initially assisted him, because there's two of them initially, then they kind of converged together, right? There was the youthful supporter and then there was Jung in his dream when they ambushed Siegfried. They ambushed Siegfried and with guns they shot him, and then that was the rest of history because of the archetypal aspect of the Germanic culture. That's what Siegfried really represented. But the youthful supporter was there from the get-go, or from the outset of the narrative, assisting Jung, and he was youthful. But Jung says, I can't remember the exact quote. Jung says something along the lines, he looked like me, and he was me. It was a manifestation of Jung as a younger man or a younger self, because of the connection with Parsifal, which was another youthful supporter.
Yeah.
And Parsifal, by the way, he was a very interesting figure because he came out of, he wasn't part of the original group of knights in the Grail legend. He came out of the woods, and he came from a distant place and eventually integrated into it. So he was kind of like an outsider, but it was because of that connection that he was able to do what he did and become the redeemer of the king in the Grail myth.
Very nice. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you certainly caught something I didn't catch. I think a lot of us missed that one. It got sneaked by us. I mean, I always knew that this figure was Jung, but I didn't have that detailed analysis that you had. That was great. Go ahead, Jordan.
So thank you, Kiley. That was a wonderful presentation.
Yeah.
So the Parsifal connection too, do you feel that the youthful supporter is then taking the forest, emerging from the forest idea forward? Do you think that is his connection to nature, or his envoy to his natural nature to take him within?
So let me ask a question back to you, just for sake of clarification. You're talking about as it relates to Jung, or as it relates to the youthful supporter as an avatar, or just the connection between the two? Can you just expound upon that, and I'll answer.
Kind of a both and.
Yeah.
Because it feels in a way from you running that line that he not only is that, but he also utilizes it as an agency or vehicle.
Yeah.
To surf back and forth. Yeah. To transport him in a way.
I think so. And what's interesting is it would take another dissertation to figure all this stuff out, but it is fascinating how many connections there are to Jung's life and his interests and the Grail legend, and the fact that he situates him right in the middle of the narrative with a Parsifal figure that is part of the Grail legend. But your question was about whether there's any significance there between the fact that he opts to use Parsifal as a vehicle for transformation within the narrative of the Red Book, and some of the background information in terms of where the character of Parsifal came from. And I think Jung could identify with Parsifal, because Jung was always, to me at least, from studying Carl Jung, he was always an outsider person. He never really, he was different, man. I mean, he was just completely different. And if you look at his childhood and where he was coming from, he was a different type of person. He was very special. We're all special, but I mean, Jung was very special kind of person. So I think Jung, because of the unique aspects of Parsifal, of where he's coming from, Jung saw himself in that role in light of the historical and mythological aspect of the meaning behind Parsifal, especially if you read the works of Wolfram Eschenbach wrote a book or a poem essentially in the 12th century called Parsifal, and Jung had that book. He read that book, so he understood the myth.
And that really resonates to me too with his quote of the more I know and the more people know, they become lonely. There are fewer people there to even interact with. And it's in a way, his other quote of, I found my extroversion to be a bane on my friends. Yeah. When he started to realize he was more introverted and he did move to the outside.
And you see that reversion, you see that shift between, 1913, he goes inside, right? He's there. I mean, he still adapts obviously to the external world, but around 1932, 1933, that shifts over. Instead of doing a confrontation with the unconscious, he moves into his confrontation with the world, where he goes out and looks at all these parallels with alchemy and Eastern philosophy. So Jung really had his career could be divided evenly in two between those time periods of his confrontation with the unconscious, building up his psychology, and then moving back out in the world and find those parallels and analogies that could help substantiate some of his theories. So absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, Kiley, it occurs to me that the Parsifal figure is really the story of the maturation of a man in the Western culture. And in that regard, I think of all these superhero figures, Spider-Man, who is this kind of outcast and has this kind of accident that gives him a kind of superpower. And listening to you, it makes me realize the parallels and how great it would be to approach this as a graphic novel. So it makes me wonder how you would go about putting the narrative elements together. Like, how would you Hollywoodize this narrative?
So let me answer your question, but I'm going to say one more thing because I think it's apropos in light of what you said. So keep in mind, the death of the hero. That was, Jung understood that the old heroic quality, or that got the West in so many problems around the turn of the century, with so many issues, so many wars, so many cataclysmic events, that mentality or that mindset had to die. The hero in that mold had to be murdered. Death of the hero. And ironically, it was a Parsifal figure, this outsider coming from out nature, and Jung adapting to those qualities. It was that type of figure that killed or eliminated the antiquated heroic quality that led to certain things like World War I and beyond. So I think that's very relevant and important to this entire narrative as well. Now, with respect to your other question, that one is a very interesting question. So here's how I envision it, and of course, I have a long ways to go to get there. But what I would, well, first off, for those of you, I didn't like the movie. There was a movie it came out in 2011. It was called Most Dangerous something with
the Dangerous Method.
Dangerous Method. I just didn't like. I didn't like the way Jung was depicted. I didn't relate to him. I didn't like the whole sexual stuff in the movie. I didn't like it. It wasn't a very good depiction of Jung or Jungian psychology, I thought. Cronenberg. But what I thought would be, you take the Red Book and you'd have a narrative, and you'd have just a regular like motion picture thing, and then you'd have, when he actually goes into his unconscious, that's when all the special effects would kick in. And maybe you could do something like, if you've seen Pan's Labyrinth, which is a great movie, very archetypal, something like that, where you could do some type of like special effects where it's pretty cut and dry. This is him and his ordinary state of consciousness with personality number one. And then when he starts going on that descent into the unconscious and starts doing his confrontation with the unconscious, then the special effects and the mood of the cinema or the film would shift and be a completely different paradigm, something like you see in really good archetypal movies, whether it's Pan's Labyrinth or otherwise. That's what I envision. I'm not sure if we'll ever get there, but I think it'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Really quickly, maybe, have you seen Highlander, the original movie?
Yeah, I love that movie. Yeah, it's
because the way they scene change seamlessly between hundreds of years back and forth, there's no blip. They either go underwater and then you're somewhere else. And that, I like the way you said the effects come out, because there is that seamless segue or fluid fluency. You can't have the erratic. You have to stay in the saddle, so to speak.
Yeah. And that's a good point too. I mean, with respect to what you said, is if you look at it, I mean, Jung was really living two parallel lives or existences at the same time. And they just like shift back and forth, especially after he developed active imagination, which is fascinating because Jung was practicing a form of yoga and practicing what's the word for it? He was practicing visualization techniques in the form of Western yoga up to that point. If you remember the scene in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, where he's talking about, he's visualizing digging a hole, he's digging a hole, he's digging a hole, digging a hole. And he could go a little bit deeper. And finally, just the whole bottom just kind of fell out beneath him. He just fell and he ended up in this crater. And in that crater, he awakes as this Parsifal-like figure per the depiction in the Red Book. So all these things are happening concurrently. So I think it'd be really fun and really cool to be able to do that someday, to create a movie out of the Red Book in the confrontation with the unconscious.
You're the man to storyboard it.
It's a plan, one time.
after you finish work, college.
Yeah.
I'd also encourage you to take a look into VTS, and because they have depicted Map of the Soul book. In each of their songs, they shift from above to below, from light to dark, as they encounter this. And so it's a story. It's a storyline that they've developed for the whole group. So I would just encourage you to take a look at that, because there's some excellent graphics, and it really has that archetypal feel to it. So
also take a look at our conversation that we had with Steve Buser, who's one of the publishers of Chiron Publications. And he went all the way through the BTS over related to Jung in that conversation we had with him a couple weeks back.
I wonder though, with Murray Stein, for those who know him, he's one of the nicest people you could meet, but I wonder if they reached out to him and asked permission or something like that prior to adapting that material for their songs.
I don't think they did, because it was only afterward that he all of a sudden he started to get sales in his book, and then one of his students came to him and said, started to talk to him about BTS, and he says, "What's BTS?" and meanwhile, his book that was sort of a steady seller, I suppose, in the Jungian community, suddenly became a bestseller because 80 million people are following BTS, and so that's why it's important. That's why I wore this purple shirt tonight, because the purple shirt is a reference to BTS, because of what they've done in the last 18 months, especially. And there's a lot of archetypal stuff there, but in terms of what you're talking about, strictly speaking, you don't have to have the family's permission to do what you're proposing to do. It depends on where, what is your reputation, or how do you keep your reputation in the Jungian community within the silo, right? Because, if you do this, maybe it doesn't matter. It probably doesn't matter, I would suppose. But derivative works are okay, from a copyright point of view. And so anybody could do this, and they wouldn't have to get permission from anyone. But it would be better if, and this is how Sonu Shamdasani persuaded the family to let him do the Red Book in the first place, because they were very conservative. They didn't imagine doing that. They kept the red book in the vault for 48 years, and and nobody had ever seen it. And Chandasani, who's a scholar, had gone and found essentially all of the red book in in manuscript form, in carbon copies in the Yale Library, in the special manuscript room, the rare books collection at Yale Library. And so then he went to the family and he said, look, this is all there. I'm going to do this with or without your permission, but it would be great if we did a great job of it. And so I want your permission. And they begrudgingly gave it to him. And he worked 13 years on it to do the red book. And now he's worked another 10 on the black books. So,
Wow.
So he committed a major portion of his career to it. But what I was going to say to you is, because this video is going to be out there, because it's going to be promoted in the BTS crowd by me. I have 35,000 Twitter followers, and a lot of them are BTS people. There are going to be a lot of people in Japan and Korea who will pick up on it. And of course, in Japan, there's a lot of manga work and a lot of people that are doing manga. So somebody's going to do it. And you might want to reference this video when I give you the link and say, look, this is going to happen probably. So why don't you let me do this and give me permission to do this soon?
Yeah.
Soon, or it'll be done by somebody who's not a Jungian.
Yeah, obviously, I'm not a copyright lawyer, but I imagine when you adapt a derivative work, you can't just you can't say it verbatim because you can't copy the material, and you'd have to adapt it in some type of creative way. So you're not just copying the material verbatim. You probably want to do that anyway for the red book, but you get my drift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there are limits. There's, nobody has ever criticized me for doing my YouTube channel, which now has over 1,100 videos on it. And in many cases, I've literally read books by Jung and others into the YouTube channel. And so, strictly speaking, under copyright, you couldn't do that, but I put a fair use on it. Did we lose? Oh, okay. I put a fair use on it because you can use it to teach people. And this is a limited group of people that want to learn. And in any case, they could never do anything about it. They would mess with the wrong guy if they messed with me, because I'm a lawyer, so I can handle my own case if they ever came after me.
Doesn't the copyright also dial itself in around just make sure you have proper bibliography and citations such that it is not plagiarism, it is a reference? Yeah. I mean, doesn't that play pretty heavy, Skip?
I don't really know. I too am not a copyright lawyer. I'm just a junkyard dog lawyer.
Okay. I had a client one year and he said, "Oh, just make sure you give them lots of credit." And that's marketing, and they'll have to leave you alone. Otherwise, they're taking away, they're biting the hand that feeds in a way. Yeah,
which always we do, of course, and that's right. And who would want to stop us from talking about these things, because there are 12,000 subscribers on this YouTube channel now. So, so even this video will have 500 hits by the end of the week, probably by a week from now. So a lot of people are going to learn about this. in a short period of time.
I just wanted to point out that I really feel like the time is ripe in the collective maturity for this material. I mean, we are just right on the edge of that point where the awareness of what the Jungian world and the Red Book is about is spilling out into the world. And BTS is a really good example of that. But I can just feel the excitement in this group for the kind of thing you're talking about. And there's going to be a lot more projects like that dive into this material, because I think the collective psyche is at the point in our maturity where people can begin to digest these ideas.
Yeah, I mean, just right now, since the middle of October, a new TV series has come out called The Queen's Gambit, which, if you haven't seen it, it's marvelous. And the whole thing is about a woman who's a chess player who she starts with some drugs, which I don't know what the drugs are, but she starts envisioning a chess game on her ceiling. And, that's how she learns chess. She does it at night, sort of in her dreams types thing. And so they actually depict this in the show, and it's a very, very cool thing. And so people are going to be more conscious about their unconscious. I mean, lots of people are now asking, well, what's the drug she was taking? I want to know that. I want to get to that place. I want to be a better chess player, whatever it is, but so, I mean, it's out there. People are talking about the unconscious now very, very much. And even I've been just doing a conversation every week out of Eisenstadt's essay in this book in volume 3, and it's taken me 6 weeks already to get through the essay, but I've been doing about 3 hours every week about it, and it's one of the most popular things I've done, which it's getting like 500 hits within a week. And so I'm going to be doing that 8 hours from now, 8.5 hours from now. But the point is that, there is a tremendous need and hunger for this material. And the other thing I've been doing with Jordan, among others, is this weekly teaching on the Tarot. And oh my God, that has really attracted people. And up until, I don't know, 2 months ago, my following was mainly young men between 18 and 34, like 92%. But now that's down to 65%. So it's drawing a lot of women into the YouTube channel. So, and, young women, and several of them they're not here in the Zoom chat, but they're on the YouTube chat, some of the women that are doing that with us. So there's a huge demand for that. And so anyway, go ahead, Jordan, go.
I'd like to thank you for the youthful supporters path, because I mean, to me, as a former architect of 3 decades, a tarot reader, tarot author, painter, and just keep on going. But I make visual connection. I laugh that I say that my mother tongue is images, and English is a second language, because I just, there's a fast fascination, and I kind of Formula One drive through them, but I've never seen that path. And as you went through all of these things that I can move through, and there's this holistic aspect of Jung, there became this, now I saw where he walked.
Yeah.
And you distilled out this brook or river that went through that, in a sense, it's like stop stirring the water and it will clear. And there was a sense of almost white light that with the purple, halo kind of thing of him moving through that actually simplified the whole piece for me. And then thank you, because it almost was like a spinal cord of a path of where he was, rather than him being the whole thing. So thank you.
Yeah, and you probably aren't following the YouTube chat, but I have a number of notes here from BTS Army. So one of them says, "Army is here, Skip," and they use purple hearts to represent the BTS Army. And Army is a term that they use to refer to the fans of BTS, and it's an acronym that stands for Adorable Representatives for Masters of Ceremony for Youth. And there's 80 million of them in probably every country of the world today. And so let's see, his girl says, I would love to know if Skip has watched any of the theory of explained versions of certain BTS songs based on persona. And the answer is yes, of course I have. And they did two albums last year. One of them subsumed the first one. The second one subsumed the first one, but they're all discussed in the Steve Buser conversation. But the first one was called Map of the Soul Persona. And so the first 7 songs, which were put out as an album in April of last year, is that. And the YouTube music videos of Persona are incredible in that, and various other aspects of Jungian psychology. You really have to look at that, because they're actually, in terms of graphics and graphic design, they're a bit ahead of you, actually. But but I'll send you some links so that you'll know what that's all about, so you won't have to search for it. Now, are there other questions? I do have one other question, but it's a little bit off this specific topic.
Really, I'd be interested to know how you're going to approach the art aspect of it, the actual illustrations.
Yeah, that's a good question. So when you say that, are you referring to like an actual graphic, this whole idea of a graphic novel, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah. What I was thinking, this is just brainstorming, is that it would be somewhat like the comic books frames I showed you earlier with respect to the actual the essay I wrote in volume 4 of the book. But at the same time, it would kind of it would shift around, so it'd be like be like ordinary reality for Jung. You kind of introduce the break from Freud, and then he'd be on the train going to Schlafhausen, and you have this like vision with blood and everything that he saw in that vision, and at some point, I would adapt the images, or whoever would do it would adapt the images, and then we'd probably shift to something more. What's the word for it? It'd be more vivid. And maybe I would shift from black and white, and when he starts having the visions, go to color in the actual graphic novel, or do a different type of different form of art style in that to make it stand off. Like you had the prosaic version, you have this archetypal, almost like psychedelic version for the actual visions or the fantasies that Carl Jung experienced, something like that. But I'm still brainstorming.
Man, it's such a great idea.
Yeah. Well, and presumably you could get some, is it fiber people to
Fiber?
Do it?
Yeah, I've thought about that, because fiber, you go off here, it's crazy expensive, but you can get it reasonably affordable if you go off Fiverr. But the biggest drawback for all of this stuff, and I'm preaching to the choir for all of you, is time. For me personally, I have a full-time job. I have a wife and 2 kids. I have a part-time job also, and then I'm also going to War College, which is basically a 2-year master's program through distance learning. So my free time is very limited. So I'm looking forward to when I have more time, I can just dedicate to all these projects.
Yeah, that's my rule is if you want to get something done, ask a busy man.
Yeah, exactly. You got to make time. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I wanted to ask you about this other essay that you had done, which was apparently an inquiry into the final painting in Liber Novus. Is that the painting with all the faces in it?
Boom, bingo. That's what it is. So that's as you can see, I'm very passionate about this one because that was not really an essay. That was a dissertation.
Wow.
That was a 400-page dissertation, and for those of you, I don't have the exact link, but maybe you can can put a note up. It's you can go to academia, academia.edu. I have an account there, and just look for Kiley Laughlin, and you can find that paper and read it free. It's also on ProQuest. I mean, it's long, but let me just very briefly talk to you about what the gist of that paper is. So when I got the Red Book, all of us have seen the Red Book, and you're looking through it, and you're seeing all the cool pictures. Oh, these are really cool pictures. And you get to the very end one, the very last one. They're all strange or interesting pictures, but you get to the last one and goes, now what the heck does this mean? You see all these faces. You see like a rainbow burst in the middle, and every single face is very distinct, but it was unfinished. It was never finished. So I started scratching my head and going, what did Jung mean by this? And my advisors initially, and Murray Stein, by the way, was my external reader. He's very supportive of the effort. But my other supervisors, and they said, don't do it. It's just an image. You don't know anything about it. It's not a good topic, So I went for it anyway. And what happened was I was actually in Kosovo. Okay, I got deployed to Kosovo for the second time when I was finishing up my dissertation writing, and I took a pass. And I reached out to Andreas Jung, God bless him. And I said, hey, Andreas, I'd love to come by and just visit the library and finalize my research for my paper. And sure enough, he let me come. So I went to the Jung library and I pulled out all the books and I looked at a very important book by Heinrich Zimmer. The name escapes me, but it's all on my paper. And the book was about Eastern philosophy and Indian art. It was about art, Indian art. And there it is. There's a picture. So let me talk about this really briefly. The book that Heinrich Zimmer wrote was written in 1929, and he talks about Eastern mandalas, he talks about images, and he talks about colors. Okay, now you can't see it on this image in front of us. This is, by the way, I call this image 169. That's a page number for the Red Book, and in some cases it's been called the Faces and Skulls. And Andreas Jung, in another paper he called The Dead. Okay, so that's essentially the names we're going off of. But as you can see, there's 127 faces and skulls in this image. Some are painted, some are not painted. And then in the middle, on the side, you have essentially a mandala figure, kind of like an image of the self or a symbol of the self with these 4 colors, these rainbow colors shooting out. Now you can't see it on this particular image, but on the left-hand side, in German, there's 4 words. There's 4 very important words or clues that are in Jung's handwriting. That are written out on the actual marginalia of the picture, and I believe they say Grut, Gelb. Well, they say red, green, yellow, and red, green, yellow, and blue. The 4, primary colors essentially, and so there was reasoning behind that. That tells me there was reasoning behind why Jung was doing that, because he intentionally put the 4 colors up there. And after doing all my research, what I pinned down, this is, again, I can't prove this, but it's very reasonable it's a reasonable inference in light of all the information that I had to research over the process of 3 years, essentially, was that this is a symbol of individuation, and it talks about Jung's what Shamdasani, I don't like the term personally, but Shamdasani calls Jung's theology of the dead. And what is the theology of the dead? The theology of the dead is that Skip and Jerome and Jordan and Kiley and Tim and Joss and everybody else, we as living people, we have a great opportunity to provide the dead who are still with us very much. And this is not just a metaphysical assertion. The dead are all around us because they still influence our actions. The weight of history is on our shoulders every day. That we can still use our choices right here in the present to affect the future and affect the past. And Jung, if you read chapter 11 of Memories, Dreams, Reflections, he talks about life after death. So even though Jung was an empirical scientist, he was also a person that looked beyond the scope of empirical science. And he actually believed, if you read the words are right, he believed in life after death. So that picture deals with that. And there are plenty of clues in the paper to include Heinrich Zimmer's book. That is a clue in parallel. And the last final clue that's most important is individuation itself. What is individuation? And this is my argument. There's some people here that know a lot about MBTI and typology. The argument is that typology is the way of individuation. And if you read the symbols correctly, you find out that the four colors are actual color toned symbols for the four functions, for thinking, feeling, sensation, intuition. And there's different variations from culture to culture, but by and large, if you look at both the East and look at the West, you find blue represents thinking, gold or yellow represents intuition, green obviously represents sensation, and red represents feeling. So right in the middle of that mandala, you find the four colors coming out, typology, and they're all merged together, going into a quintessence in the middle. And we are that middle of that. Here's last argument, I promise. The middle of that mandala is actually Jung himself, relating to his ancestors. And if you look into those pictures, you look at these people here. I can't prove it, but there's certain figures here that look strange like Goethe. You find one that looks like Swedenborg. You find even one that looked like Abraham Lincoln on the right-hand corner there. And Jung knew about Abraham Lincoln. He greatly admired Abraham Lincoln. He wrote a letter to the Lincoln Library in Hallgate, Tennessee, and talking about how much he admired Abraham Lincoln, and talking about Lincoln now being, part of, I can't remember the greats beyond or something like that. I can't remember the exact words he used in that letter, but there's even a parallel there. And there's a strange figure here that kind of looks like Abraham Lincoln. So on the down there, you see the guy right there, that dude looks like Abraham Lincoln. And Jung thought the world of Abraham Lincoln. It was one of his heroes. So anyways, that was the thesis and the idea behind the picture, or the painting.
Yeah, and I heard that this is all people he knew. They may have been dead, but people he knew.
No, I don't think so, because if you look, if you look at the, sorry, Skip, if you look at this, like you find some pictures of people, like in the upper right-hand corner, you see a guy wearing a Peleus cap, a Phrygian cap, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the Phrygian cap obviously goes back to Ulysses and Odysseus. He wore one too. And that's why the Kabiri wore it, because the little pointed hat like a gnome, right? So there's a mythological aspect to it. So if you look back, on the outer rings, the further you get away, their skeletons, or they're kind of mummifying and going away from life, because the center is right there in the center where life's at, and everything kind of descends away into the ancestors, whether it's spiritual lineage or biological lineage. That's the argument behind that image.
Right. I would argue that he knew them, even though they may have lived thousands of years ago. And I'm sure you're familiar with this book called Lament of the Dead.
Yeah.
We're using that as a text for our advanced reading group right now, and working through all those conversations. And of course, that's the essence of that book, which is that we're all living our dead. And, I'm certainly experiencing it myself in terms of resurrecting my grandfathers, for example, my grandmothers, and having changing my attitude about them in later life. And so they're certainly alive in me. And so, as far as life after death, there's definitely, I mean, here we are talking about Carl Jung, and he's been dead for 60 years. And so he's not dead at all. He's alive in all of our psyches.
Well, that last picture to me is very numinous. It's powerfully spiritual. in the sense that, well, Jung was very influenced by the Gnostics, and it has that Gnostic theme of we are part of the all, and it includes the past, present, and future, and we're just one. So just wanted to throw that 2 cents in.
I agree.
He also reverses there, because the chthonic, the dark, is usually the depth, and the within, which would be central, and he has the numinous in the middle, and then the chthonic, or death, or the depth or death, either one, is then on the periphery, moving out. So he's in a sense turned it inside out at the end, towards the end of life, where he made it in a way.
So I can't prove this. It's interesting because if you look, here's the picture right here on the left-hand side. You see, you know, the mandala with the rainbow burst, and then all the figures of the past, all the dead, whether it's spiritual lineage or biological lineage. But you're right. It's like it's an inside-out mandala. It's like the dead are looking up into the world. Through Jung's eyes. So it's inside out compared to the other mandalas in the Red Book. So it really, in my view, it culminates with this image 169. And ironically or paradoxically, it's unfair part of it. Maybe we are the ones that have to finish Jung's work, and our posterity have to do that.
Definitely. There's no doubt about that.
I heard a quote somewhere, and I don't know if it was Goethe or if it was Nietzsche, but there was the always complete, never finished. It sounds more like Goethe, but because he was never hurry, never rest kind of guy. But you're right, because I think it's a counterpoint, and it's actually a compliment to the remainder of the work. And in a sense, this becomes that larger scale, overarching both and of the syzygy, where this culmination piece then gives credence to all of the work prior, in a sense.
Right. And all your references to color and so on, that's all in the Tarot, which hasn't changed in 600 years. So, so that makes
I mean, blue, thinking, air, communication, swords, red, feeling, wands, energy. I mean, so the color combinations actually, even in the Tarot, are not even transposed. They're identical. The sequence may be different, but based on personal preference here and there, and where you come with an historical path. But it's interesting when you ran through those, the feelings and the attributions are identical.
And
they're not attributed; they're the same.
Yeah. By the way, so when I was doing my dissertation research, I studied the color symbolism exhaustively, and you can find probably 10 or 20 references throughout Jung's collected works where he talks specifically about the color code. And then also in the ETH lectures much later, he does the same thing. So
right, and those are continuing to come out. They're ultimately going to be 8 volumes of those. I think there's only 1 volume that's actually published so far. But anyway, so Lamore Strong claims that she thinks that this is only 1/2 of a larger image. And I don't recall. I mean, the Red Book is so big that it won't fit on my scanner. But I think this is pretty much the whole image.
Was there a second half of a diptych to the left?
There wasn't. No,
there wasn't. It seemed to be just a.
And by the way, so I interviewed Sonu Shamdasani, and I also interviewed I can't remember his name now. It was a guy that was actually physically there in Zurich that was scanning it from California. It's from Culver City. I can't remember his name right now. I feel bad, but there's no other picture. That was the last picture, and there's a bunch of blank pages afterwards. But there was no other picture with that. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, it also makes sense. He would start on the left, and it would emanate and move over, living from the unconscious to the right.
Right.
Yeah,
I agree.
So, Kiley, the 12 images that you said you saw that were not in the Red Book, are they all in the Art of C.G. Jung, that book?
Yeah, most of them are all in that book. Unless there's other ones out there that are missing for example, but the vast majority are in The Art of C.G. Jung, which is a great book.
Yeah, and they're in there, I think particularly the Kabiri and the image of the tightly tied knot or something.
And to your point, you find the same. I don't have it here in front of me, but you have this. You find the same figure of Carl Jung, of Parsifal essentially, with the sword and his brain, and then the Kabiri there. In fact, I can probably see if I have it here real quick. No, I don't have it, unfortunately. Okay.
Tim, you were going to say something earlier. I think I cut you through or cut you off.
I need to push off here, but I just really wanted to thank you for this experience. It's been really rich.
Yeah.
And I look forward to whatever the next piece is. I hope you keep in touch with us.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you, Tim.
we should have another session, Kiley, about this other paper, I think.
Yeah, I'd be honored whenever. I'd be
So
honored.
thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you all hopefully again soon.
Thanks, Tim.
Good night, Tim. Thank you for being here. Terrific.
Bye, Tim.
All right, I'm in.
Glad to see you. Okay, everyone. Thank you all, and thank you, Kiley Laughlin, for giving us a wonderful discussion today. And I will have this is going to be rendered on YouTube within an hour, and sometime in that time, I'll be able to send you the link to it. And it will look like it's on live stream for another 24 hours or something like that. But anyway, that'll be the link to it. And we really, really appreciate you being here. I hope
this has been excellent.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Hope,
well, thank
Very
you.
good.
Enjoyed
Thank
it.
you.
I hope you've
Thank you.
and we have had about 45 or 50 people on a going concern between the YouTube and the Zoom over the 2 hours. So there'll be a lot of hits on this, I'm sure, over the next few days. So you're going to be either famous or infamous. I don't know which.
I'll take whatever it is. So
okay, good. Well, nice to meet you.
likewise. Thanks, everybody.
We'll talk again soon.